Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to tonight's Planning and Development Control Committee meeting. My name is Omid Miri. I'm chair of the committee. Just going to run through some housekeeping points before we get to the main items on the agenda. Firstly, this meeting is being live streamed to the council's YouTube channel, so by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the meeting calmly by the nearest exit, which is through the doors on the right and out the main entrance, and the assembly point is on Blacks Road. And toilets can be found through the door at the back on my right as well. And can I just ask that everyone introduce themselves before they start speaking, including officers, please? Thank you. That takes us to item 1, which is apologies for absence. And we do have apologies from Councillor Trey and Councillor Carmel. Item 2, declaration of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? No? Okay. And item 3, minutes of the meeting held on 11th of February 2025. Are the minutes agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, if that can be recorded, please. And that brings us swiftly to item 4, which is 28 Wendell Mews. And Neil, whenever you're ready, please introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to 28 Wendell Mews and shows site location or aerial photograph here. The site is highlighted in red. It is the site itself as 9 and 9A Gayford Road to the front, 2 houses, and a house at the back on Wendell Mews. The site was previously a laundry and was redeveloped in 2012 for 3 houses. This just shows the site context. You can see not in the conservation area. The conservation area just slightly down there to the southeast. And then just further a bit clearer in terms of where the conservation area is. So 28 Wendell Mews is this property that is pointed out here in the arrow. It's white rendered, this level. You can see PB panels at roof level. And you have the 2 houses then in Gayford Road to the north. Again, this aerial view shows the 28 Wendell Mews is this property to the rear that I'm showing with my cursor, which includes a 2-story building here and an external roof space there at first floor level. It's just a view looking towards, say, 28 Wendell against the white property indicated by my cursor. Planning permission, say, was granted in 2012 to redevelop the site for 3 houses, and then in 2020 planning permission was granted for an additional floor with 3 rear windows at roof level to 28 Wendell Mews. This was approved but was not constructed, and this application is now lapsed. Just so show some site photographs there. This is from Wendell Mews looking towards number 28. And again, and this is the rear. This shows the rear part of 28 Wendell Mews as viewed from first floor level at 9A Gayford Road. You can see they have an external terrace here, and then this courtyard area drops down to ground floor level. And again, this is viewed from the first floor level at number 9 Gayford Road. Again, you see 28 Wendell here, and they have their own external terrace and a ground floor courtyard. And then this is the view up towards 28 Wendell Mews from the ground floor courtyard area of 9 Gayford Road, and again from 9A Gayford Road. So this diagram just highlights the close proximity of the properties. You have the 2 Gayford Road properties here, and then outlined in red is Wendell Mews. So the external area at first floor level will show where my cursor is, and that has the dining room and living room, etc. there. And then this just is a section through showing again the relationship. This shows courtyards at Gayford Road, a ground floor level, which then look up towards the development. So the proposal is for a rear roof extension, to put a roof over the existing amenity space at first floor level to create an internal room, and then a staircase enclosure going up to roof level with a small roof terrace surrounded with 1.7 high meter opaque screens. The screening has been set back from the boundary with 9A Gayford Road by 1.5 meters here, and then the staircase enclosure is angled away from the Gayford Road properties, rising upwards. From here, this would be the view from Wendell Mews. This is the staircase enclosure here, this at the end, with the terrace and the screening here. It also shows the windows on the front of Wendell Mews, which are also being replaced, part of this application. Excuse me. And then this is the north elevation, or the rear elevation of 28 Wendell Mews. So you have the access enclosure here and the screening to the terrace. And then here is where the existing terrace level is, and there'll be a pitched roof placed over that to create office space. See here, this will be the pitched roof over the office, over the existing external area. And then here you have the rectangle effectively is the roof terrace set back from the boundaries. And then this pitched roof going up is the staircase enclosure. So it's angled away and set back from the boundaries with 9 Gayford Road. That's just from the other side. So the ground floor of the property, there is no change for 28 Wendell Mews. At first floor, the external area now becomes a proposed office stroke TV room. And then obviously, as I say, you've got the staircase enclosure and the terrace at roof level. The application was subject of consultation with the local community, as originally the scheme, when it first came in, was for another additional floor at roof level, so a larger structure than was previously approved. That was considered unacceptable to officers, but the concerns raised by local residents from 5 addresses, we had 11 representations saying it's an overbearing structure, impact outlook and privacy, the smaller bulk of the smaller mass of the Mews House and Wendell Road reflects good urban design. Allegedly there's no terrace at Wendell Mews, although certainly photographs indicate there is. That the scale, height and bulk of the other Mews House is built as appropriate. Should be a daylight, sunlight overshadowing study. Then the following officers' concerns, the applicant revised the scheme to say enclose the existing external area and put a terrace at roof level, but included a gazebo at this point. Officers were concerned that the gazebo would be a more dominating structure at roof level and would allow for more intensive use of the roof terrace. So we felt it was unacceptable. So the applicant then removed that gazebo from the proposal, just leaving the terrace and the access enclosure. So it was consulted again, and we've got a further 6 representations. Again saying it's an overbearing structure. The height in the terrace walls would create a safe feeling of enclosure. The windows to the first floor to Wendell Mews result in overlooking. Terrace will generate noise, etc. Also considers that a daylight and sunlight study should be performed on behalf of the applicant. Officers have considered the application at length and are satisfied that the impacts of the terrace on the surrounding neighbours is acceptable and would not be such that would warrant withholding planning permission. Consider the terrace as relatively small at 15 square metres, enclosed with obscure glazed screening, and to prevent overlooking loss of privacy. The limited size would reduce the number of people that could use that terrace, and therefore are recommending approval for the proposed development. I would just bring attention to the addendum, which just paragraph 6.10 of the report has been changed just to clarify that the windows at first floor front elevation onto Wendell Mews have been installed already, and these are frosted on the bottom half. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. Now we move on to speakers. We have Stephen Askins, who's speaking on behalf of Olivia Kay. Stephen, whenever you're ready, if you just come to the front and press the button on the right-hand side, it should go green, and you have 3 minutes whenever you're ready. Thank you.
What I did there with that
And
button.
feel free to take a seat as well if you'd like.
Do you know,
Whatever
I think
you
I
prefer. Yeah, sure.
feel comfortable standing up. It's a pity that the drawing showing the proximity of the properties from the 2012 application, not the current one, because then you could see the heights. Perhaps Neil could look and see if there is one whilst I speak. So firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. The reason we're here is that essentially we all are temporary custodians of the built environment, inheriting the decisions made by those who came before us. And that's why this process and the planning committee is so important. What I want to do is just give a bit of background and then summarise why this application should be refused on the grounds of gross overdevelopment and its overbearing nature, unneighbourliness, amenity harm and overlooking, and a dangerous precedent for second floor terraces. So in background, Neil covered some of this. Yes, it was a single industrial site, limited size, as you can see, very densely packed. The permission in 2012 was to develop the site with 3 close-knit houses, which actually overlap in footprint. And it was approved despite the high proposed density at 609 habitable rooms per hectare, which is well in excess of the guidelines of 200 to 450, which the location, as you can see, supports. As you know, currently, the 3 houses have first floor terraces, which currently work harmoniously. 28 Wendell is still owned by the developer, who made what you might call an afterthought application in 2020, which, as Neil has said, has since lapsed. At that time, he also owned 9A, so obviously he didn't object to his own application at that time, which was approved during COVID. As Neil has mentioned, there has been quite a bit of work going on post that lapsing, so there could be enforcement action taken to restore the property as it was. Turning to the application before you, as Neil has highlighted, there are a number of process oddities. What's now before us is completely different to what was originally there. The council hasn't received any further planning fees as part of that process, but these are completely different applications. But despite the changes, the scheme has a number of harmful impacts and no public benefits. Firstly, it's overbearing and unneighbourly development. It's increasing that already dense rooms per hectare. It results in 3 significant losses of residential amenity for Gayford Road. Firstly, the terrace impacts. It's significant and unneighbourly. It's overlooking and the loss of privacy. It will offer penetrating peeping Tom views. The average man in Britain is higher than the proposed screening, for example, and particularly onto the private areas of the adjoining terraces, which is a real issue, plus the noise disturbance, which will be broadcast from this high-level second floor terrace. The lean-to roof, which Neil has highlighted, creates and exacerbates the feeling of enclosure on those other terraces. It cannot be seen as high-quality design, far from it. And there will be a loss of sunlight due to the second floor structure with the screening and the stairway structure. It's important to note that the main habitable rooms of 9 and 9A are actually at first floor level. So this terrace will have a direct impact on the kitchen, etc. areas. In addition, it's contrary to the Policy 8, protection of amenities as the supplementary planning document, and there are significant loss of amenities to the residents on the other side of Wendell Mews. And those changes have already been made. They were recessed windows with no direct views. That's now been changed by the developer. So in summary, there's no public benefits to outweigh the harm of this afterthought application to the original development of 3 houses which relate well to one another in the very compact area. And that there is the concern that the process issues and the lack of enforcement action could expose the council to risk of JR. If he was here, I'd invite the developer to withdraw it, but as he's not, I invite the committee to refuse it on the grounds that I've already said: gross overdevelopment, unneighbourliness, amenity harm and overlooking, and this dangerous precedent for second floor terraces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
How long was I?
Sorry?
How long was I?
A little over 3 minutes, so that's okay. Don't
Thank
worry.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you'd like to return to your seat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to questions for officers. Who would like to start the questions? Yeah, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to pick up on the point raised there just about the privacy screens. From the presentation there, it's established at 170 centimetres, I believe. Could you speak a little bit more as to the decision-making or the policies behind the decision to set it at 170 centimetres?
That is just the standard height that we look to achieve with screening for roof terraces. What we've generally used throughout the borough. You know, it's effectively, it's largely considered that the screening is above eye level for the general population, and therefore, you know, helps to prevent the overlooking and loss of privacy.
And when you say above eye level, you mean for someone standing on the terrace?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Yep, Councillor Fortbellier.
Thank you, Chair. A really quick one for me is about daylight and sunlight, etc. So one of the representations says that you had it in your table. Thank you for including that. There should be a report. There isn't a report. So how do officers approach this? As I think you or this committee has been told before, it's not usual for residential properties to do such reports. But then, how have officers monitored or measured the loss of sunlight?
I mean, all applications, as we've obviously outlined before, are determined on their own individual merits. Generally speaking, with a small sort of residential development, we wouldn't expect a daylight and sunlight report to be provided unless we had concerns from our own assessment of the proposal, in which case we might suggest to a developer that we had concerns along those grounds, and they should, you know, if they wanted to demonstrate that further to us, they would do so. I mean, if I just, you know, the property, you know, is set quite, you know, it is a compact site, to say the developments are close to each other. However, the screening is pulled back from the rear boundary of the property to help pull away from the neighbouring properties. You know, if you took the BRE guidance angle from this, shall we say, the main kitchen dining window here at first floor level, you would take a line at 25 degrees, and if the development cuts through that line, may have an impact. It doesn't in this case. Officers have looked at that. At the ground floor level, the window here, the main impact there would be the existing courtyard and the boundary walls itself. And again, I think the impact of the screening, which says obscurely glazed, so light will still come through to some degree, that, you know, the harm would not be such that would be considered to require an assessment.
So what is it in the courtyard? Is it habitable rooms? in the ground floor courtyard, there's what appears a picture of a small tree. Is that because if I drew a line, I could see that the glazed windows on top of the proposed terrace would kind of.
Yeah, I mean the courtyard. This is a bedroom in the courtyard area. Well, sorry, according to the approved plans, that's what it was indicated. I mean, you can see, say, from the photograph, you can see he's looking up toward from one of the courtyards, looking up here. That's the existing parapet, and then the screening would be, say, 1.5 meters pulled back further away. So it's going to have a limited impact there, and it would not substantially harm the light received by that room.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, any other? Yep, Councillor Baskerville.
Thank you very much. Just a quick one from me. Were we to reject this, what's your assessment of the chance of successful appeal?
I mean, that's difficult to make a judgment. You know, the planning inspectorate again would deal with all appeals on their merits and would look at the case put forward by both sides. I think personally it would be hard to sustain a refusal on the impact on the neighbouring properties, but that is my opinion and the case officers. So that's all I can say. That.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, no further questions. Okay, in that case, we move to voting. Firstly, we'll vote on recommendation 1, which is on page 14 of the report. Councillor Chavot-Verdier, do you vote for, against, or not voting?
For.
Councillor Melton.
For.
Councillor Souslous.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Baskerville.
For.
I'll also be voting for. Now we move on to recommendation 2, which is also on page 14. Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Melton.
For.
Councillor Souslous.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Baskerville.
For.
And I'll also be voting for. So that application has been approved. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now we move on to item 5, which is Burnham House. And Neil, once again, whenever you're ready, please introduce the report. Thank you. Sorry? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for your time. Yeah, thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to Burnham House in Solgrave Road. The proposal is for the erection of a rear roof extension, which involves an increase in the ridge height of the property in connection with the creation of a new self-contained studio flat, and then alterations to the roof of the back addition to incorporate a small roof terrace, together with the erection of obscure glaze screened around the flat roof. This shows Burnham House highlighted here. There are 12 properties, I believe. As you can see here, Percy House, Hazel House, etc., which are all 3-storey developments, all housing 6 flats, or originally built as 3 stories housing 6 flats. This is the aerial view looking towards the site, and Burnham House is indicated here with the red marker. As you can see, on either side of it, there's properties with rear roof extension and a number with roof terrace as well, similar to that proposed. But a rear view here, again, you can see there's, say, 4 properties, 4 of these houses at the moment have a rear roof extension, and these 2 to the north of the application site, which here have the small roof terrace as well. I would just point out also, while we're here, look at the other side of Solgrave Road, there's a significant number of rear roof extensions in the terrace, which offers part and character and appearance of the area. The site is within the Melrose Conservation Area, and I've just got the front elevation here. You see 3 stories, the red door, and a closer view. You can see refuse bins are stored on the, and recycling bins are stored adjacent to the doors. This is the upper 2nd floor level landing within the property. There'd be stairs would be added here going up. And you see at the moment, the ground floor, you got flat either side. Cycle store proposed in the shed under the stairs, cupboard under the stairs, sorry. The first floor, again, 2 flats, 2nd floor, 2 flats. And then we get to a small studio unit created at the top with the small terrace you can see to the rear. And then that's just the roof plan, flat roof, and again showing the terrace. That's the proposed front elevation. And then the rear elevation, you can see the screening and the terrace set within the existing pitched roof of the back addition. And the roof terrace, you can see the small increase in the ridge height as demonstrated there. And then that's, again, just a cut through, section through, showing the terrace. And there you have the, so it is a small studio unit within the roof space and a small terrace which measures up approximately 9.5 square meters. Opposite there's been a lot of history in the street for similar developments. I mean, back in 2007, the Planning Commission granted for a rear roof extension on 11 of the blocks. They were not implemented at the time. And then 2015, there was an application for eight of the blocks to have a rear roof extension and terraces. That was refused by committee and considered overdevelopment, inadequate cycle refuse storage, unneighbourly, visual amenity harm to the conservation area. The applicant has appealed that decision, and the appeal was dismissed by the planning inspector, but only on the grounds of design and character and appearance. All the other reasons were not upheld. There've also been individual permissions in Friaring House, Percy House, Eric House, Holcombe House between 2014 and 2017. In Hazel House, then in 2018, there was a similar application that was refused on the grounds of insufficient quality of residential accommodation. Then the applicants reapplied following that, having made some alterations to the proposal. That again was refused on visual amenity and quality of the accommodation. The appeal was dismissed only on the grounds of design and character and appearance. And then following that, in 2020, there's another application that was for Hazel House, refused on grounds of substandard living accommodation, impact to the conservation area, overdevelopment, impact to residential amenity, cycle park and refuse storage. That appeal was allowed in June 2021. The planning inspector felt that all the reasons for refusal would not stand up, and considered that the impact on the character and appearance of the area was acceptable and in line with the existing pattern of development. Since then, there's been planning permission granted for Home House, Myrtle House, to have additional floor at roof level with a terrace. So we did have a number of objections, say, from residents who are still concerned about overdevelopment, intensification, harm to the appearance of the Melrose Conservation Area, noise, overlooking privacy, loss of light, impact on parking, congestion, refuse and recycling storage, fire safety, reduction to communal hallway space. They were concerned that studio flat would encourage short letting, such as Airbnb, and I'm not quite sure, that any use of a property as Airbnb would involve enforcement action if that was not authorised, if it was for more than the the limits allowed under the legislation. So officers, have assessed the current application, bearing in mind the pattern of development of the area, previous appeal decisions. We feel the development is acceptable and are recommending the planning permission be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Is there anything in the addendum we should be aware of? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the addendum makes a couple of minor amendments to the two recommendations, and then there's also an additional condition being proposed relating to the provision of a wastewater heat recovery system for the new flats to help with air quality by reducing emissions and making the development more energy efficient.
Okay, thank you very much. Now that brings us to speakers. We have two speakers. Firstly, Caroline Needham speaking on behalf of Yasmin Pettigrew. Caroline, whenever you're ready, you have 3 minutes. Thank you. Either one I think should work, yeah.
Right, thank you. First of all, I would like to start by... Yes, it's on. Yeah, I always wait for the green lights. Very well trained in that regard. We wrote, Ms. Pettigrew wrote on the 8th of March 2024, particularly asking that policy DC8, which has particular regard to the use of buildings and accessible and inclusive design. I am going to concentrate in the 3 minutes I have in looking at the impact of the loss of amenity, both on the level outside Ms. Pettigrew's flat, between flats 5 and 6, and also on the ground floor. The adjacent houses have had their extensions built from within inside the flat to extend the available accommodation for the residents. This application proposes a staircase being built in a very small area outside the flat. This would impede the accessibility, and I'm particularly concerned about the accessibility for emergency services and for ambulances, and for the people who definitely will need, in the event of an emergency, somebody on a stretcher. If you take that stretcher, if you can imagine, you take it out the door, and before you go downstairs, what you need to do is to have sufficient turning space so that the person at either end of the stretcher is in line with the staircase and can safely evacuate somebody downstairs. As we know, emergency services access to buildings is vitally important. But what is, in my view, equally important is that once within the building, the emergency services have sufficient room to be able to evacuate somebody in the event of fire or in the event of somebody needing that evacuation from their flat by an ambulance or indeed firefighters. I now am going to talk about the communal space on the ground floor, and I'm, on behalf of Ms. Pettigrew, very concerned at the loss of storage space. I'm particularly concerned because that storage space is currently has flexible use. And it seems to me extraordinary that that use, which could, and in fact might well for Ms. Pettigrew, provide storage space for mobility aids and indeed a wheelchair, is potentially going to be lost to store a bicycle. And I think that this is a house which, in common with many of the buildings in Hammersmith and Fulham, presents a challenging environment for anybody with a disability. We know the built environment is not ideal, and we indeed have listened to our Disability Commission on many occasions, drawn attention to the lack of accessibility. My concern about this application is that far from enhancing the accessibility and inclusive design, this actually impairs the existing access routes for someone who has lived in the building for more than 40 years, and like potentially somebody who might move into the studio flat, moved in when she was a young and fit person and easily able to manage stairs. There is no lift in the building. There was I can see no way that that could happen. I'm not asking for that. What I am asking that is that the committee considers the fact that whilst we asked for assurances that the current accessibility would be maintained, it seems to me that disability access has not at all been addressed in this application. And I would further add that the fact that these plans have been going on and off over 10 years has caused considerable distress to Ms. Pettigrew. 10 years ago, she was able to afford a solicitor, and now she's asked me as a friend to represent her. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Caroline. Now we move on to Councillor Daly, who is one of the ward councillors for the ward, and you have unlimited time whenever you're ready. Either one, yeah.
Thanks very much. Unlimited time. I feel like the leader at budget meeting. Wait for this. Thank you very much. Okay, so Caroline was just talking about this being on the books for 10 years, but actually it goes back longer than that. I think the first application was in 2007, February 2007. So it's been like a sort of Damocles hanging over these residents for some 18 years. You'll find that in the, I think in the letters sent in, every single resident in that building has objected, and they've been objecting right the way through, and for really good reason. It's been refused on several times, and it's gone out and it's come back. Planning Commission's been granted, and I think that they haven't acted on it. And now we have this proposal in front of us that I'm just going to say is really poor. This is a really poor proposal. The very minimum requirement for any dwelling in is 37 square meters. That is, if you imagine sort of 6 meters by 6 meters, it's nothing, it's tiny. But that's the minimum that we require, 37 square meters, and 2.5 meters in ceiling height for at least 75% of that space. This proposal is just 37 square meters. They've squeezed it in to get to that, but they haven't managed to get the height in. So it's actually only 2.3 meters. So that's a 6 by 6 meter space, which is just 2.3 meters high. It's really poor quality housing. The Mayor's Housing Supplementary Plan says failure to meet one standard would not necessarily lead to an issue of compliance. But I think the spirit of that is very much that if you're imagining a space that's maybe 40 square meters, that's maybe a bit more generous in some areas, it can be less generous in others. This isn't. This is just barely hitting the minimum. It's really poor. And I think they failed to kind of convince anybody in the plans, and Caroline said it so very well, that it's not going to cause an issue for residents that are already there. That whole idea of creating a stairwell inside what is really a very tight space is impractical, and nobody in any of the reports has really been convinced that otherwise. I'm not going to take a lot of time. I'm just going to ask you to consider that actually, with it being such a really poor quality proposal, with so many issues embedded in it, and a big question over whether it's actually achievable to create an entrance to it. If you are minded to approve it, I'd ask you to consider maybe some additional requirements, such as an external entrance, external staircase to this property. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Okay, that brings us to questions for officers, and who'd like to start the questioning? Yep, Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. There's a complex and sort of very different history of overturning appeals, and the planning inspectorate at times taking a variety of views when it comes to very similar applications, and they have now been realised immediately next to this property. I'm interested in the last overturning of this. So that was rejected on appeal in 2017. But the only refusal reason that was upheld by the planning inspectorate was visual amenity. So to the representations that have been made, were the quality of the housing provided, as in tiny or low ceiling or anything, was that included as a reason for rejection? And does that mean the planning inspectorate has decided that actually that was fine?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, sorry, which appeal were you?
That was on page 32.
32, right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, in that respect, the appeal, there were roughly six reasons for refusals there outlined, and the planning inspectorate felt that there was no justification to refuse the development on the other reasons that were listed there, apart from the say the visual amenity one. I mean, then further on, we've got an appeal at Hazel House from an application that was refused in 2019, and we used reasons for refusal of visual amenity and substandard living environment, and that was dismissed purely on design and character and appearance. Again, they didn't consider the substandard to be a substandard living environment. And again, I mean, there's further applications on that site, which led to refusal in 2020, I think it was, which again, we used substandard living environment, impact the conservation area, cycle parking, refuse storage, and impact on residential amenity. And that appeal, which was determined in June 2021, was allowed by the planning inspector. They felt there was no grounds on those reasons to withhold the permission. I mean, they've judged in the past that whilst the height is not ideal, the internal ceiling height at 2.3 meters, they still felt, given its location at a high level, the rooms are going to still get, and given a studio will achieve a good standard of natural light and daylight, and therefore they felt that meant that the living environment would not be substandard.
Thank you, that's helpful. And we've heard from the representations about the access to it, which I see is outside of the red lines. How does that work? Because that's an addition as part of the planning application, but that's also not in the planning application.
Yeah, I mean, there will be, I think, yeah, I see there'll be a stair created up at that point from the common lobby. I mean, the lobby itself would still remain of a reasonable size for the existing flats. And I would point out then the development will also be providing fire lobbies at the application site level and on the floors below, improving the fire safety for the development as a whole. That's something that's required under the building regulations. So they will be making these improvements for the existing building.
But then the width, specifically, we heard tonight about the potential issue about the width of access, of going up the, helping someone get down if they need, or carrying objects or whatnot. If it's not in the planning application, it's outside the red line. How do we scrutinize this? Because it is an important aspect of the application, because that's access to the property.
It is. I mean, the access, the stairs are not going to be made any narrower or reduced in width as part of the development. They're remaining the same. So there'll be a slight lobby created there, but I mean, building regulations would also be heavily involved in ensuring that the space is usable. I mean, officers are relatively comfortable what's been proposed here, as per other sites in the borough, that would be accessible and people would still be able to get up and down the stairs in case of emergency.
Just to interject, apologies, Councillor Chavot-Verdier, just to clarify. So as part of the application, there will be some additional stairs taking you from the existing staircase into the new flat. Yep.
Yeah, just shown here, this where my cursor is, that's the existing stair coming up to this lobby.
Yep.
And then you've obviously got the red line there, which is where the fire lobby be created, but the stairs up would be created there, going up to the studio flat, as per, say, the previous approvals for similar developments in the terrace.
And so will the new staircase as part of this application be of the same dimensions as the existing staircase in the building, or not any smaller at least?
It wouldn't be any smaller. I mean, looking here, it's the same width. I mean, obviously there's a turnaround there, but I mean, building regulations would have very strict guidelines as to how the width of the stairs and the turning space there.
And that's for emergency services access.
Yeah, I mean the application has been considered by the council's fire safety and means of escape officer, and they're comfortable. They confirm, because you're adding an additional floor, you must improve the means of escape to meet the current building control standards, which is the reason why they've created the fire doors and glazed screens to create an internal fire lobby. It's a significant improvement, they consider, to the means of escape for existing and future occupants. And so it does say that use of glazed doors is not a concern as long as these meet the required fire resistant standards. But I mean, that will all form part and parcel of the further building control process, and the consultation will be taken by building control with the fire service to seek their observations at that stage as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chavot-Verdier, did you want to carry on? No? Okay, I'll come to Councillor Pascoe-Toubery.
Could I come in on that, though, please? Because, yes, the introduction of a fire door is an improvement, but at the same time, you are having the loss of space. So you're essentially, losing one good thing and replacing it with another good thing. But that really is, comparing apples and pears. So, I mean, from there, it seems as if flat 6 is just about going to be okay with space. But flat 5 does lose a significant amount of space with being able to move things into and out of the door. And if that flat 5, if that space there is essentially the width of a standard door, then you're really left with a very, very tight space to maneuver in. And I absolutely get the point the lady has made that, in a stretch situation, that doesn't seem enough to me, especially if you've got a big fire door in the way.
I mean, I'll tell you, yes, I mean, I think this, there's your width, standard width of a door. I mean, this area is definitely wider than that. I mean, I think we're comfortable that you will still be able to manoeuvre furniture, goods, and things up, through the properties without causing significant harm for the occupier.
And that space would be within building regulations standard?
I believe so, yes.
It'd be good to have confirmation.
Matt, yeah, did you want
to? I don't think we can confirm whether it's meeting building regs. That's a completely separate process. We're here to just present it against the planning legislation and other material considerations. So the building regs would be covered separately. So we can give committee comfort that it meets all the building regs. We'd expect it to, and normally an applicant would check that off. Otherwise, they're obviously wasting a lot of time and money pursuing something that would fail a building reg stage. And as I said, our building regs, people have no concern or objection, I should say, with it.
Okay, any further? Yeah, Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to turn to another matter of the public area, which is the addition of cycle storage. I know in the report, obviously, there's a reference to there being not enough cycle storage being provided for the entire building. I believe it references 7 spaces would be needed, obviously 1 per flat. But how many spaces would this under staircase adaptation provide for?
My understanding of it would provide cycle space for 1. It'd be for the new flat that's been proposed.
Right. Obviously, we've touched on a number of items here tonight regarding the common area and the reduction in space. In terms of, obviously, this, it doesn't sit within a vacuum, even if we've got to consider just the one application. Is there any other cycle storage provision on site, or what measures or mechanisms are there, again, thinking of fire safety here, about ensuring that the common space is being maintained safely, particularly if there's going to be cycle storage and only being 1? How is that going to work?
Obviously, the existing building was built prior to the requirement to provide cycle storage for the occupiers. Therefore, we're only considering the requirements for the additional flat that's been created. I mean, this is what's been proposed on a number of schemes previously, and it was considered an acceptable solution in terms of cycle storage by the planning inspector on all the appeals, even where the appeals were dismissed. It was generally considered that there was no dispute or argument with cycle provision being provided in this storage area on the blocks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay. No further questions? Okay. No? Okay. In that case, we'll move on to voting. Firstly, we'll vote on whether recommendation 1 in the report is agreed, and that's on page 26. Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Melton.
Against.
Councillor Souslouz.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Pascu-Tibure.
For.
And I'll also be voting for. Now we move on to recommendation 2, which is also on page 26. Councillor Chabot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Melton.
Against.
Councillor Souslouz.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Pascu-Tibure.
For.
I'll also be voting for. So that application has been approved. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you. Now we move on to item 6, which is 15 Eustace Road. And Roy, whenever you're ready, please introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to draw the committee's attention to the addendum. There is an additional condition proposed, condition 4, which basically seeks to restrict the property from being converted into a small HMO. There's also some additional text on page 55, paragraph 2.6, which is the background to some of this application, which is making clear that the applicant ceased works on site back in September last year. And then there's also a little bit of clarification for an additional window or an existing window at upper ground floor and its impact from the resulting development. That's it. So, thank you, Neil. Next slide. So the proposal relates to a rear extension at upper ground floor level on top of the existing back addition. It's actually single level, so the back addition as it stands at the moment is just in single story form at lower ground level. And then on top of that proposed upper ground level addition, there would be a new terrace or an enlarged terrace because it would meet with an existing terrace at that level. Thank you, Neil. So you can see the site on the left-hand side highlighted in red. It's a mid-terrace property with sort of no depth in terms of back garden, so the existing footprint of the building backs onto the boundary of the site. And the image to the right, you can see the context in terms of its situation in relation to the adjacent conservation area, which it falls outside of, but is adjacent to the Fulham Grove conservation area. Thank you, Neil. So it's just an overview of the site. So the left-hand image, you can see there's a pink building. So it's not that one. It's the blue one to the right of that, which is the application site number 15. And then top right, you have the rear elevation of that property number 15, which has the hedge in sort of an L-shaped form at lower ground level. And hidden behind that hedge is an existing terrace. And then to the left, you've got the building in white, which is the property at number 13, which has various levels and has been converted into flats at upper ground, lower ground, and then another flat masonette above that. And then to the right, you've got number 17, which again is in residential use, but then notably both of those properties have two-story back additions. And then the image below just shows the context again, where you can just about see below the L-shaped hedge, the lower ground floor of the application side. Thank you, Neil. So I just got some images, and the sort of image on the right summarizes the position. You've got an existing lower ground floor, and what's proposed is to introduce a bedroom at upper ground floor. And if you look at the image on top left, you can see, if you can get to the top left, Neil, your cursor show where the bedroom is on the top image on the left-hand side. I don't know if you can get your cursor to that point, Neil, on one on the left-hand side, sorry, the floor plan, that one, that's it, thank you. So, yeah, so you've got two properties there, number 13 and number 15. The north side of that image is number 15, and you can see that the rear part of it would comprise that bedroom, but significantly that bedroom doesn't form the whole part of the depth of that projection, because an existing projection at the moment, which is about 2.7 meters deep and includes part of that staircase and circulation space. So the extension would be beyond that and would also include a water closet. And then the image on the bottom, you can see that it says balcony, but it's actually a roof terrace, which is accessed by an existing first floor access point. Thank you, Neil. So it's just existing, a sort of before and after scenario. So the image on the left is existing, which shows a sort of existing position with a terrace at upper ground floor. And there's a very short terrace at first floor. And the extension will infill the space above the lower terrace, and then would also involve the creation of an enlarged terrace at that level, albeit overall the combined terrace area will be the same as what's existing, but in a slightly different situation. Just to point out here that this image also includes a additional floor, which wasn't shown on the photograph. The reason for that is because there was an appeal which had a split decision. That appeal was in 2024 after we refused the application, and essentially the inspector allowed the roof extensions, works at roof level, but refused the extensions at the upper ground floor on the back of the property. Thank you, Neil. So in terms of the split decision, I just mentioned that the works at roof level were approved, and you can see that photograph on the left-hand side has that blue building. You can see the additional floors been implemented. And then the rear extensions, which are shown on the image on the right, which are equivalent to what's being proposed tonight, those were dismissed, and the inspector dismissed those extensions at the rear on two grounds, essentially. One to do with loss of outlook from the lower ground floor level at number 13, and the second part, in the absence of any information to convince him otherwise, loss of light to those same occupiers. So taken together, the loss of light and the loss of outlook were seen as being reasons to dismiss the appeal. Thank you, Neil. So this is just trying to show the existing situation from within those properties. So the top left image shows the circled in the larger red, if you like. On the right-hand side is the terrace at upper ground floor, and then you've got the window highlighted at some windows at lower ground floor in the neighbouring property. And then you can see on the bottom left, you've got that flank elevation of number 13, which is adjacent property. So at ground or lower ground floor, I should say, you've got a bathroom at the rearmost part of that flank elevation, and then you've got a door to a kitchen area. When you look at that image, you can see the kitchen area that's existing, and then you can see the door, the view from that door looking to the application site directly opposite. Thank you, Neil. And this is the rear of the property. So you've looked at the flank, and now this is the main rear elevation. So at lower ground floor level, there's a bedroom window. And then above that, there's a separate unit which has its own habitable room in that equivalent space. And then above that, there's another window which is not affected by development in any shape or form. The middle image is just showing you what the view is from that bedroom window at lower ground floor. So you can see that there's a view to the rear and the properties beyond that. And you can just about make out in the top left corner of that image some scaffolding. But as you go right up against the window, you can see obviously the scaffolding which has been erected in connection with some works which have commenced and have ceased, but they have commenced. But there's not any work going on at the moment. But essentially, the view of the proposed extension would be, if you like, visible wholly from the edge of that window. But if you're from the centre of that window, you probably wouldn't get as clear a view. Thank you, Neil. So this is just really trying to highlight the works that are going on. So you can see a view that's taken from within the site at the top left, looking down to that back addition. The works that are being carried out are being covered over by a canopy at the moment to sort of protect them, awaiting the outcome of this application by being considered by a committee. And the middle image is just showing again the works that are underway. And you can see in that image that the brick wall, which is sort of in a slightly lighter brick, is being raised. Notably, the terrace, I think to the left of that middle image, is existing, and the proposal would result in the height of that extension being raised to match that level. And then beyond that, you've got the boundary wall of the neighbouring property at number 17, which has its own terrace. And then again, the image on the right is just looking to views to the rear. Thank you, Neil. So just taking you back to what the inspector was concerned about. The inspector was concerned about daylight and he was concerned about outlook. So whereas previously the application that was considered by the inspector didn't include a daylight and sunlight report, the applicants in this case have submitted a daylight and sunlight report, which demonstrates essentially, in summary, that the proposals are compliant with the BRE assessment, which in terms of light hitting those 7 windows which have been looked at, it's compliant in terms of what we call vertical sky component. In terms of no skyline, which is a measure of how much daylight gets into a room, in fact, the daylight distribution gets it within a room, it's compliant with that. In terms of how much sunlight hits those windows, it's compliant with that. And in terms of how much light gets to the roof terrace at number 17, which is to the south of that image, on the south of that image, and then to number 13, which is to the north of the application site, it's compliant. So I think the key measurement in all of these is that in each of these scenarios, whether it's a vertical sky component, no skyline, or sunlight, or sunlight out to amenity space, so long as 80% of the light is retained, then it meets the BRE guidance. And you can see in many of those cases, it far exceeds that target. So it's basically addresses the concerns that are raised by inspector. We've got no reason as officers not to believe the information that's been provided. Thank you, Neil. And then we come on to sort of 3 kind of related issues, but if you start left to right, you'll see 3 images. The image on the left just highlights where obviously where those windows are that are neighbouring, and also the roof terraces. And so in terms of privacy, if you like, officers consider that there's a mutual overlooking between the existing arrangements anyway, because the windows show not first floor level in the flank elevation, which is highlighted as number 2 in this image. So you'll see there's windows in the flank elevations 1, 2, and 3. It's the one on the upper floor, which is the upper ground floor of the number 13. That is actually a bedroom window. However, we feel that because there's already a terrace at that level anyway, there's mutual overlooking, and then the proposed terrace would be raised up to the same level as the terrace which is existing at either side, effectively. So you can see in the middle image there's some bollards, or not bollards, metal bars around the proposed terrace, and there's some equivalent around the terrace to the left of that, which is the number 13, so it's like mutual overlooking, effectively. And then that window number 2, in terms of outlook, because you have to look at outlook in terms of impact on that bedroom, because it's a habitable room, there's a 45-degree line there, which shows that if you're looking from that bedroom, you still manage to get a sufficient outlook from that window, because that extension wouldn't breach the 45-degree line. So that's outlook from the flank. And the last element is the outlook from the window number 4, which is the lower ground floor level, which is that image that I showed you before, the views from within that room. Normally our standards, which our guidance would encourage that there be no more than a 15% reduction in the unobstructed view from a window. In this case, there would be 50% reduction from 60 degrees arc, if you like, on the top image, down to 30 degrees arc. The reason for that, I think it's a little bit unusual, because that projection, which is there at the moment at upper ground floor, is quite shallow, and it's equivalent to, you wouldn't necessarily see it in its existing form from the window at number 13, which is at lower ground floor, number 4 in this image. And that's significant insofar as our guidance says that if there was no extension at that level, we would take into account on-site judgment. And I think that's quite pertinent in this case, that we have to look at on-site judgment. And I think in this case, based on on-site judgment, we think on balance it's okay. Thank you, Neil. So overall, we think the design of the proposed extension is subservient. The inspector didn't have any issues with the design previously, neither do we as officers, and we think it's acceptable and sympathetic to the setting of the conservation area, which is adjacent. And as noted in the presentation, the daylight and sunlight is compliant with the BRE. We've no issues with outlook, on balance overall. Also, just to say that in terms of noise, we don't really have any issues with noise either, because you've got established principle of 2 terraces either side, which are existing, and the proposed terrace would match those in terms of size, being about 15 square meters, which equates with what we would maximum we would allow under our guidance. Okay. Thank you. Just on to the next one, Neil. So I think that's a recommendation, I think. Yep. So officers are recommending that the application be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Now we move on to questions for officers. Do we have any questions for officers? Yep, Councillor Pascal-Tiberi.
Thank you very much. I refer to sort of points 2.4 to 2.7, which deal with the history of this. And if I understand it correctly, the reason why we're considering this is because, having been refused a recommendation, the owner just went ahead and built something, and so essentially been bounced into having to consider this rather than doing it the normal way. And I just wanted to get your view if that statement of facts is correct, and if so, any opinion you might have on the ethics of planning applications being done this way.
Yep. Obviously, from a pure planning point of view, the application that was decided by the inspector had an appeal that was with a split decision. That meant that part of the application was allowed and part of it was obviously dismissed. So I think the applicants started to progress the works at the upper level, which were approved, and then unfortunately they carried on with the works at the rear, which were not obviously approved. With our enforcement team, we've been working with the applicant, and as you can see in the report and in the addendum, basically we're told after several site visits to stop works, to cease works, and put in an application to rectify that. And that's what they've done. And they've actually ceased works. I think it was in September. That's when the work ceased, as per the addendum. In terms of process, we as a council obviously don't look kindly on works that are carried out which are not authorised. However, there's a process to be followed, and in terms of process, you know, an applicant can retrospectively put in an application for planning permission, which is what they've done in this case. We then have an opportunity to determine that. If we decide that we want to refuse the application, we could then serve an enforcement notice for them to sort of undo the works. And then obviously then they have an opportunity to apply to appeal against that in terms of process. And then if that was then obviously dismissed, they could then go to the high courts, etc. But essentially there's a process, and it's only when you get to the high courts that the high courts say, you know, it's unacceptable, then at that point they'd have to comply with the notice. We've not reached that stage now. You know, we've done as requested, put in an application to rectify the position by putting a retrospective application. It's not the normal process because most people don't do it that way around, but that's how it's happened, and that's what we're dealing with. So ordinarily, if we as a council were to take enforcement action now and try and get them to force them to undo the works, it wouldn't be prudent at this time because we'd be acting unreasonably. So we have to follow due process.
I completely understand that. A couple of follow-ups, if I may. Firstly, was it your opinion that this was a simple mistake made by the applicant, not in full knowledge of the facts of the process?
I wouldn't like to comment on that because obviously I'm not privy to their mind, but all I can say is that in terms of process, we've been dealing with the facts. When the facts of the case is unauthorised, so we have to deal with that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My second question is, bearing in mind that this second extension had not been approved on appeal previously, would it be to be appealed again? Does the previous inspector's conclusion carry significant weight at that stage of the process?
Yeah, obviously the first appeal was done many moons ago. The second appeal is more recent because it was done in August 2024, but there are material circumstances which are different in this case compared to the previous appeal. I think the main thing is, as pointed out in the presentation, is that the inspector didn't have before him any information regarding daylight and sunlight, and clearly from the information presented to us and as part of the report provided by an expert, and we've reviewed that independently, we have no reason to disagree with its conclusions. So then you're then left with the issue of outlook. So if you take, I think what the inspector said was taken together, daylight and sunlight and outlook, that's why it was dismissed. But then if you remove the daylight and sunlight, you're then left with outlook. And when he talked about outlook, he talked about the lower ground floor in its entirety, was actually, through the presentation, hopefully you've seen that it only really relates to one window. And that one window is a bedroom. It's not the main living area of the dwelling. The main living area is obviously the living lounge, etc., dining areas, etc. But this is a bedroom, which is not where somebody would spend most of their day. So that's, on balance, we feel it's not appropriate to refuse the application in these circumstances.
Thanks very much. That's very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Yep, Councillor Schwartz-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. We're still on the topic of the applicant. There's a mention of a concurrent application. What is a concurrent application in this context?
Yeah. In short, sometimes people put applications in and they might want to, if they get to 8 weeks because of time scales, time frames, they might want to appeal, and they can do that on the first application. And on the second application, they can have that running and then carry on negotiations, etc., until at some point a decision is made, but that may or may not come before the appeal decision. However, I'm not sure whether that was the reason here, but certainly the other application is materially different. I've got an image actually. Can you show the next slide, Neil? Sorry. Can you show the next slide? Sorry. That's it. Yeah. So you can see, that's it. That's fine. Yeah. So you can see this is the concurrent application. The significant thing here is that that bedroom, unlike the application which is before you tonight, doesn't have a window in any of its elevations. And the reason for that, I think, partly was that on the rear elevation, because it backs onto the neighbour's garden, it's on the boundary, they couldn't have any windows overlooking. And then for some reason, they decided that this was an option to have just the roof light at terrace level. So this is not what's before you tonight, but this is what they say they will withdraw if this application is approved. But obviously that's not necessarily a material consideration here tonight. It's just something that we're dealing with separately, but it's, for the benefit of the committee, this is, the other proposal. So.
I just wanted to add that the fact that they have already started the work without applying for planning permission should not be taken into consideration, because the legislation does allow for retrospective applications, and they have done that now.
Well, thank you very much for clarifying this. It doesn't change my feeling towards that. But so the applicant has put a second application for a bedroom with no windows.
That's correct, but that's not the application before committee tonight, yeah.
So which is it? Is the applicant completely ignorant of planning regulations, or are they playing games?
All I can say to you is that as planning officers, you know, we've reached a point where we think the application that is before us is acceptable. However, the application that's still under consideration is still under consideration. So, yeah.
And in your conversations with the applicant, they did not feel the need to come and reassure this committee in person?
No.
I through the chair. Oh, sorry. Is it just because on that point? It may well be. I don't know. I'm just speculating that if, for example, this was overturned and refused by committee, they may rely on that, and for the reasons of loss of privacy from that side window, then they may feel this is a fallback position they could pursue with the council, because there is no window, although you do get lighting through the roof light. Whether that meets building regs, I don't know.
So that one's still under consideration, and officers haven't made a judgment on it, and that's not what we're considering today. We're considering the application that's before us. And as you say, so just so I understand, this may be a fallback option. Again, it's not what we're considering tonight, but it might be a fallback option because it goes around some of the privacy concerns that there might be in this one. Yeah. Okay. Any further questions? Did you want to? Yeah, Councillor Shaffer, yeah.
Thank you. Could you remind us, did we get representations from residents around?
Yes, we did. So in the report, there's reference to 2 objections and a letter of support. The objections refer to the appeal decision, and they also reference the back additions either side, saying that shouldn't set a precedent for the resulting back addition in this case. And there's some other concerns about natural, I think, ventilation, I think it is, or I think, just bear with me a second, I can tell you. Yeah, so there was a comment about natural air movement around the site, and we felt that the site's quite modest, so it's a modest household extension, so that's not necessarily something that's going to be of concern. They also talked about the drawings, saying the drawings submitted were insufficient to understand the relationship with neighbouring properties. Obviously, officers have been out on site. The submitted drawings meet the validation requirements for planning, and having reviewed the drawings together with the site visits and site visits carried out by enforcement team as well, we're satisfied we've got enough information to be able to make assessment.
And the 3 representations, 1 in support and 2 objections, was that more, fewer, or equal to the amount received during the original application?
That I don't know. I have to be honest with you. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay. No further questions. All right. In that case, we move to voting. Firstly, on recommendation 1, which is on page 52, Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
Against.
Councillor Melton.
For.
Councillor Souslus.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Basque-Tibere.
Against.
And I'll be voting for. And moving on to recommendation 2, which is also on page 52, Councillor Chavot-Verdier.
For.
Councillor Melton.
For.
Councillor Souslus.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Basque-Tibere.
For.
I'll also be voting for, so that application has been approved. Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to the end. I'd like to thank everyone for attending or watching tonight's meeting. The minutes will be published and approved at the next meeting. Sorry, they'll be published on the website and they'll be approved at the next meeting on the 2nd of April, 2025. And if you have any queries concerning the applications in the meantime, please